And on the way to that tomb, suddenly they see that what was a massive stone that was in place has been rolled away. It's fallen to the ground. They don't understand it. They don't understand how an object so heavy could be moved. They go into the grave. They don't see what they expect. And suddenly 2 men are with them. The story is told and retold again and again. It doesn't matter what denomination, it doesn't matter what preacher is telling it. The basic story will be told. But then at that point, the preacher will ascend to the pulpit. May have a very high lifted up pulpit. He may have, or she may have, a very large congregation with a very massive staging area. May have the person may be dressed in a suit, may be dressed in a robe, may take on various forms, but at that point, doesn't matter the denomination, the messages take dramatic divergency. And it's not just because of the uniqueness of each preacher or the way that the uniqueness that each preacher applies. I'm talking about the divergent paths that each preacher takes in believing the story and believing how that story should be applied. British theologian brought this out in his book about hope, N.T. Wright, very interesting writer. The whole book is a book about resurrection, about what it really means. It's about the afterlife. He tries to wade through the myths. He tries to wade through the stories. And then at the end of the book, he says, after all is said and done, after we review all of history, after we do a good interpretation of the scripture passages, he says what still happens on Easter morning is you have basically two types of preachers that enter the pulpit. On one hand, you have the more traditional type of preacher, Pastor Frank, gospel man. And Pastor Frank is a good, traditional, fundamentalist preacher. And he believes the traditional stories. He wants his congregation to understand that that tomb was really empty. He wants his congregation to be able to visualize the stone literally rolling away, untouched by human hands. He wants them to see the brilliance of Christ stepping from the tomb in resurrection. He wants his congregation to know the fear that the women first felt when they saw the angels next to them, but then the joy when they put it all together and they go running back to tell the 11, not 12, but 11, the good news. Now, Pastor Frank, being a person who wants to see or wants his congregation to not only hear his message, but see his message and truly believe it, is not one who is unwilling to do anything possible. He's even one Sunday brought up 4 volunteers. And in front of them, and the whole congregation, in his moment of exuberance, Pastor Frank took a daffodil and ate it. And then sent the 4 out. And then brought them one one by one, and asked them to retell to their entire congregation what just happened. They got 4 different stories, but one common message. The pastor ate the daffodil. That seemed unbelievable, but it really happened. And what Pastor Frank's point was that even though there was these 4 different stories told 4 different ways, they had one common event, and it really did happen. And he did that to prove to his congregation that Jesus really did rise from the tomb. Now that old-time preacher has a favorite hymn. I quoted it earlier. It's a good hymn. He says, "You ask me why I know he lives. I know he lives. You ask me how I know he lives. He lives within my heart." Pastor Frank knows the risen Lord. He's convinced beyond doubt that there's life after death, because Jesus has gone on to prepare for us a place in heaven. He warns his people that only those who enjoy a vital relationship with Jesus Christ will get to enjoy salvation and life eternal with their loved ones. Now that's the traditional message. It's a good message, but what Tom Wright pointed out in a way that kind of opened my eyes while I was reading his book is that there's an element in Pastor Frank's message that has no foundation in Scripture. Nowhere in Scripture can you find that the purpose of Jesus coming and rising from the grave was to prepare for us a place in heaven. Jesus does not rise from the tomb so that we can go to heaven. In fact, there's no place in Scripture that talks about us going to heaven. There's the talk of resurrection. But when we rise from the grave, we don't go anywhere.